Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first talk of our series, Wildlife Handling, Healthy Care, including capture, treatment, and disease management. And today our focus will be on the herbivore medicine, the big herbivores of Africa. That's rhino, elephant, giraffe, and hippo. My name is Sarah Maranga from Shareskin Africa, and I will be your host today. And I'm very happy to host as an alumni from the University of Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. As future veterinarians and conservationists, it's very important to understand the challenges and opportunities in managing the health of wildlife populations. However, hands-on experience is very limited, and that's why today we're having this series with experts, people who have spent years in the bush working with these big animals, big herbivores. By the end of this talk, you should be able to explain the management of these big herbivores in capture and also in wild settings. 2, you should be able to explain common diseases of giraffe, hippo, elephant, and rhinos. 3, mention vaccines given to each of these animals. 4, you should be able to explain how this vaccination is administered and how the medication is done in these 4 herbivores. So who are our speakers today? Yesterday, I spent time looking at their experience, and when I added up their years of experience, guess what? It was more than 80 years. So today we are learning from people who have been in the bush for more than 80 years. Wow. I'm so jealous for these students because I never had this opportunity when I was a student. Okay, so for a start, we are going to start with Dr. Cooper, Dave Cooper, who will talk about rhinos. And then we'll go to Nairobi, where Victor will be talking about management of giraffe. And Dr. Richard will talk about the diseases of the giraffes and the management of it. Then Dr. Richard will also talk about hippos and elephants. So you may be wondering, who is Dr. Dave Cooper? Dr. Dave Cooper is someone who has done a lot of work when it comes to rhinos. And to our students in Ilongwe, I should say he's the one who helped to bring the rhinos to Malawi, the black rhinos that we have. He has participated a lot in the translocation of different animals, including in Malawi, Zimbabwe, and just last week, he was in Tanzania. So Dr. Dave Cooper, the screen is yours, and we're so happy that you made time to talk to our students in your busy schedule.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure, honor for me to address such a broad audience from all over. It's great having to deal with students other than South Africans that come from further north of us, because I think that's where our future often lies. I'm going to be talking about specifically black rhino and their capture and translocation, a little bit on diseases and parasites as well. But I think it's important just to note that we've got 2 distinct species of rhino in Africa: the black rhino, number 1, and then the white rhino, which is more common and found down in southern Africa. I don't think there are any in Malawi, but there's certainly some in Zambia and elsewhere as well, in southern parts of Africa. And the reason why I'm distinguishing between the 2 is, number 1, because the black rhino is what we find in Malawi. And the other thing is it would take a long time because they are 2 distinct species. And I often say that the only similarity between the 2 is the fact that they both got horns. So if we look at the white rhino, very different from the black rhino. It's almost twice the weight of a black rhino. They're also grazers, where the black rhino are browsers. Hence, I think the wide lip, where the term white rhino comes from. It's a veit, which is Dutch for wide. And Yeah, they're two completely different species to deal with. So if you look at the black rhino, you can see immediately we've got characters here with a lot of character. Their heads are up, they're looking for trouble, and they are very, very special animals to deal with. And I often say that they are their own worst enemies because, in comparison to the white rhino, they uh, they really are feisty, and sometimes you think that they just want to kill themselves. But let's go on to it. I'll just explain some of the differences between the two. So the black rhino, number one, it helps us quite a lot because they respond a lot better to the medications and drugs that we use for immobilizing animals. They don't suffer from serious side effects that we do generally get in many of our herbivores, such as respiratory depression, etc. The other thing is that they adapt pretty well to boma environment, a boma being a form of temporary confinement. So after you've caught the animals, you put them into a boma at the bottom left of your screen. White rhino can be very, very temperamental, and often the only solution is that you have to end up releasing them. Also said that they are not as sensitive to postural changes, and that's got a lot to do with the body size. You can imagine a big, heavy animal that weighs almost 1,000 kilograms more than a white rhino is going to be compromised if it's lying on its legs too long, etc. So in that sense, they also help us when we're talking about translocations. Black rhino are very complex social animals, and I think we're still trying to understand the complexities. But it does make translocation of these animals quite difficult, and you'll see later why we recommend that we only take. We prefer doing a once-off kind of translocation, putting all the animals in at once instead of like adding on, which you can do with the white rhino quite easily. The other thing that makes our capture quite difficult is they are being browsers. They tend to favor the sort of thick, bushy areas, difficult to find, and then you've got very difficult access in terms of vehicle access. And we'll see that we often use helicopters to assist us in getting them out. The big difference that also makes it difficult for capture is if you're going to be doing a cow and a calf together. In a white rhino, the cows and the calves stay together. But in black rhino, it's the complete opposite. You find that the doesn't matter which ones you try and dart first, there's always going to be a lag between the mother and the calf in the terms of actual immobilization and going down. And as a result, they split up. I just put a little note in the bottom there. Keep toilet paper handy. This is only because it's happened to me, and I'm sure other people as well, that you find that when they split up like that, you can't keep your eye on both animals at once. And in thick bush, it can be difficult then to go back and try and find the one animal that's perhaps gone down first. Another thing that makes it different in terms of managing the drugs that we use for mobilizing is the fact that they are extremely sensitive to the antagonist. So a small amount of an antagonist can wake a rhino up, black rhino up very, very dramatically and quickly. And it's something that one always has to be aware of when handling these animals, where the white rhino are far more tolerant and easier to manage in terms of the drugs we're using. So the drugs that are used for both black and white rhino are very similar, and I think this applies to all your large herbivores, except perhaps for your hippo, where your potent opioids such as etorphine and the newer generation thiofentanyl are the primary opioids that we prefer to use. We always add a tranquilizer into our mix for one other reason. In the case of some of them, it counteracts the side effects of some of the opioids in terms of like blood pressure problems. And then we also might add something that's even more potent in terms of antagonists into our mixture, but you always have to be careful. You want to get the animals down as quickly as possible, and hence the reason why we prefer to use hyalase. For those of you who don't know what hyalase is, it's an enzyme that one finds actually naturally occurring in sperm, and it's the enzyme that's responsible for allowing the sperm to enter the egg cell, but very useful in terms of speeding up the absorption of a drug once you've injected it into the muscle. The antidotes are pretty much standard. Naltrexone being the antidote of choice in terms of a pure antidote. It wakes that animal up 100%, whereas the other ones are more partial antagonists, and you do sometimes get a sort of a agonistic effect after you've administered it. I found that with all the translocations I've been involved in, that the most difficult is to get the animal from point A to point B. I mentioned that right in the beginning that they're extremely fractious animals. They seem to want to do themselves damage, and you just have to do everything in your power to prevent this from happening. And this is why I always stress that the drugs that we use, fortunately, these days are very, very effective in terms of the sedation that we achieve. One of the most popular drugs that I'm and others are using is midazolam, which is very similar to Valium, but it works extremely well on the black rhino for keeping them quiet. And the other one is something zuclaventixol, or commonly known as Clopixel, which is used for a 3-day period for tranquilization. It's an absolutely essential if one's moving rhino over any sort of distance and over any period of time. So, we've developed all these combinations and drugs over a period of time, and hence the reason, if you go back in historical records, you will see that there's a lot of records of mortalities and incidents of rhino not making it to point B. Fortunately, I can say that these days it's extremely rare that we have any incidents, and it's largely due to the fact that we finally seem to have hit the nail on the head when it comes to the type of sedation that we're using in rhino these days. Right at the bottom there, I mentioned using a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. This was something that we just standardly used to do in the old days, because the rhino were prone to hurting themselves while they were in the crate being transported. And it was always almost a preemptive kind of measure. But these days, with the right amount of sedation, and the animals are normally transported extremely well, and over long distances and over a period of time. So, as I mentioned before, the tranquilization during transport is pretty important, midazolam being the most important one. If you get the initial sedation right in the stages when you're actually loading these animals, it's often not necessary to give any additional form of tranquilization or sedation en route. But if one needs to, you've got a couple of things in your first aid box: your zaparone, which is something that's been used for decades. Butorphanol is something that's just useful to have and to have in the armory. And midazolam is the go-to drug these days. So we find that often this inadequate sedation is what leads generally to problems with post-release of animals. You'll see there in the bottom right-hand picture, there's a rhino in a crate. You can see it's a completely unnatural posture. It's busy pushing, and that's because it hasn't been sedated properly. It probably needs either a little bit more or a little bit more or a little bit less. But there's extreme pressure being put on those legs, and you could end up potentially, unless you correct it quickly, you could potentially end up with a rhino in the top left-hand picture, which is it's developed myopathy or muscle damage into the back legs, and I'm afraid 9 times out of 10 a rhino like that is not going to make it. And the bottom and the other picture there is a black rhino that's sitting in our bomas in the old days, a long time ago. This was a rhino that damaged its neck so badly by pushing in the crate that it actually tore the muscle that supports the forelimb, and I ended up having to euthanize this poor animal. So, I mentioned in the beginning, we have in the past made lots of mistakes, and hopefully we've learned from our mistakes, and we don't make the same mistakes again. Similarly, when we were releasing animals, rhino, we found that in the past, often it was a question of putting the crate down, opening up the door of the crate and letting the rhino go. Well, you were virtually asking for trouble in the sense that rhino is cross. He's angry. And when he gets released like that, he looks for something that he can hit. So he'll hammer the box because that's the closest. If any vehicle's in the nearest vicinity, he will definitely go for a vehicle. He'll damage the tires, if not more things like radiators and whatever. And obviously, people are right in the line. So we've changed the method of offloading rhino. Black rhino, what we do now is we actually give them more immobilization while they're still in the crate. When the moment is judged right, you open up the crate, you let the rhino out, you trip it up using those ropes, and you then vacate the scene completely. Take the vehicles away, you take the crates away, you take anything that can possibly hurt that rhino. And when you've done that, you will then give an antidote, which is given into the muscle, so it doesn't work that quickly. It takes time for the animal to, it takes a minute or two longer for that animal to realize where it is. And generally speaking, we find that they wake up and they immediately just start looking for something familiar that they can eat on. I mentioned earlier in the talk that we prefer giving once-off large introductions rather than staggered. We've had plenty of problems in the past with animals that are getting killed by resident bulls, for instance, in particular. And so we've learned again from our mistakes. This is also something very unusual. We normally will wake the black rhino up individually and in different areas in their own sort of designated locations. Whereas this one, we were running out of time, and these were 5 rhino that were all woken up together. And the reason why we chose to do this was also that all 5 rhino had been caught in a very similar area in South Africa, and they knew each other. So as a result, although when they woke up, there was a little bit of finding your feet and saying hello, hello, a lot of grunting and a bit of roaring and whatever, but there was no damage done, and all 5 rhino went off into their separate directions. It's similarly with cows and calves. We also have to manage it very carefully. You find that it has happened in the past that unless you manage it carefully, you find that the mother leaves the calf or vice versa. And you want them obviously to stay together, especially if they're being released in a strange and foreign environment. Just a little bit on the diseases, bearing in mind that rhino have evolved in Africa and therefore evolved with African diseases. So indigenous diseases that have been in Africa for forever have adapted themselves to the rhino. And it applies similarly to some of your tick-borne diseases. We all know cattle that succumb to diseases such as redwater, etc., caused by Babesia species. Whereas rhino, unless they're severely compromised or stressed in some ways and their immune system has been depleted, they are resistant to all of these diseases. In South Africa, we do find some of our clostridial diseases, such as tetanus, black quarter, etc., caused by Clostridia, can be a problem in captive rhino. But certainly in large, extensive areas, which I'm used to working in, it's not a problem. It's also something that one can vaccinate against if it becomes a problem in smaller, confined areas. And diseases such as anthrax, for instance, have been vaccinated for in smaller areas because rhino do succumb from anthrax. However, it's never really been a problem in terms of where rhino and anthrax naturally occur and have occurred for centuries. Places like our own Kruger National Park and in Namibia, Etosha Game Reserve as well. So, I think diseases are not really something that we worry too much about, not in a natural environment. Arboviruses is being diseases that are spread by some sort of vector, insect-borne vectors. We do occasionally get some of these cases, but also very rare And in my experience, I've actually only experienced it in animals that have been held in captivity for a temporary or long-term period. Very interesting, I find, is more some of the parasites associated with rhino. This is something that's quite special. Gyrostigma rhinoceros. It's a stomach bot that is quite large and quite distinct, and often people find these in the feces of rhino and bring it to you and wonder what it is. They live with the rhino. It looks like they cause damage in the stomach, but it's a perfectly natural occurrence, and we don't actually usually we don't do anything about it in terms of any form of anthelmintic treatments or anything. Interesting that it's the bot is itself, the egg is laid by this fly, which is very elusive, and not many people have seen it and witnessed it, because it's mostly active in the sort of early evenings or late evenings. You find it around the head and face of these rhino. They lay their eggs around the horn bases, around the lips, and the rhino then will ingest some of these tiny eggs, and it will develop into these bots, which eventually end up in their feces. Very pretty ticks as well. And again, one of these species, I think there are 5 species that are unique to rhino. And we have to remember this, that when we're moving rhino from one place to another, that we're not just moving the rhino, that we're actually moving them with both internal and external parasites. And the big question amongst us as conservationists is this the right thing to do, to deworm them or to treat them for ticks, or do we just leave them so that the rhino goes together with all its parasites that it's hosting? Another one that's also pretty unique here is amblyomma. It's not as pretty as the previous one, but nevertheless, it's typical for rhinos. Something that we see a lot, and tourists in particular will often report them as rhino that have been injured, because not as in this case, it just looks like a sort of a scar. It's just a lesion behind the arm there. But it can become quite angry and inflamed, and it gets worried by oxpeckers and flies, etc. And people think that the rhino might have been shot. It's perfectly natural along the eastern seaboard of South Africa and Southern Africa anyway. Something called Democentor, Stephanofilaria danicki, which don't need to remember any names, but when you do see it and you come and visit me down here in Zululand, it's perfectly natural, and we're used to seeing it in all rhino when they get to the age of 2 years and up. This is one disease we do worry about when we're translocating rhino, is nagana, or trypanosomiasis, which is transmitted by our common tsetse flies. Fortunately, in Natal, we are in an endemic area. We do have tsetse flies in the northern part of the province I'm resident in. As a result, we assume that the rhino are relatively resistant, even though they get exposed to different forms of trypanosomiasis and different tsetse flies when they go elsewhere. But we definitely are concerned about it, and we do sometimes take precautions by giving preventative injections, or it's a prophylactic kind of injection that we give before translocation, and hopefully the animals adapt to their new environment. This was something we were a bit concerned about when we took black rhino into Longwe National Park, and Majeti for that matter, where they were black rhino, and we think that the black rhino are a little bit more resistant to the disease than white rhino. And in that particular instance, we didn't inject them with any prophylaxis or anything, but what we did do was we reduced the fly load by putting out a lot of tsetse fly traps over certain periods, until we felt that the animals were well adapted enough to be released into bigger areas. Something that's also become very, very popular, common to use, is the use of helicopters Simply, number one, the black rhino don't listen to helicopters. So when you're darting them from the air, you find they just run in their own direction, and often they will go away from any access where you can access by the conventional means, by roads, etc. And because they often exist in very thick, densely bushy areas, the only way of getting them out is actually to sling them out with a helicopter. So it is a method of translocation or capture that we've been using very commonly. And this is a picture taken from a long time ago where we just used a net attached to a frame. But these days, we just lift the animals up attached to the four legs. And we've shown it's perfectly safe and viable. Doesn't worry the rhino at all. And they can be transported over fairly long distances. I think one of our colleagues has probably got the record where he went and fetched a black rhino that had got out of North Luangwa National Park in Zambia, and it was for a distance of over 200 kilometers. So they were able to sling that rhino all the way back. They stopped, I think, twice just to check on the rhino, and that was it, and the rhino was fine. And that's about it that I can tell you about rhino per se, the black rhino in any case. So yeah, it's a very special animal for me and very close to my heart. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. I definitely learned a lot. We're just going to open the floor for some questions. So if any of the students or any of the online audience have any questions, please feel free to either ask your question in the chat or simply go to the Zoom toolbar and click on the raise hand option. And you can then raise your hand and ask a question. I had a question about the transport of the rhinos with the helicopters. Doesn't it, like, I just think of myself as a human and someone pulling my arms, and that could be quite like a shoulder pain. Like, doesn't that affect them badly in terms of their joints, if I could say that?
Yeah, Mariette, it was obviously a concern of ours right in the beginning, and hence the reason why we put them into nets. But we subsequently suspended these rhino and made sure that we were monitoring them continuously for a period of time, and certainly no side effects whatsoever. So yes, we're very confident that you can transport these rhino, not just black rhino, but white rhino as well, over periods of time. No problem at all. It looks very uncomfortable, but according to a friend of mine that was also slung under a helicopter in the same manner, just to prove to everyone, he said, no, it's fine.
Okay. Well, if I ever do visit you, we'll try that. Okay. And then I don't see any other questions. I also wanted to know, do you have a very interesting story to share with us with one of the translocations that you've done? Something that never happened, or that's very interesting, or maybe funny, or anything like that? I know I'm putting you on the spot now because you probably have 1,000 stories.
Maria, yeah, I think what we've learned over time is it's all about careful planning and preparation. And it really is. It's sort of, I think we say 80% plus of a successful movement of rhino is because of careful planning.
Yeah.
And as a result, we've also learned over time things that, methods have been developed, and we can't say we've perfected it yet, but we certainly are pretty much better than we were, put it that way. So as a result, we've taken rhino over vast distances. My last relocation I did with black rhino anyway was to Chad, and it's a long way, and the rhino were fine. They've really done well since they were released anyway. So yeah, we're very confident that we can move these rhino over long distances for long periods of time, and we can manage it.
Thank you so much.
I can tell you lots of stories where things haven't gone well, but those are the ones that you try and just never try and imitate again, and you learn from your mistakes.
Yeah. So there's kind of a follow-up question from Joshua that says, what's been your greatest challenge with the black rhinos? It's a very broad question, but I think you kind of covered it in a bit with your answer now to me as well.
Yeah, it's a good question, because they always are a challenge. It's sort of one of the things that keeps you on your toes all the time. You just, when you think that you know all the answers, they'll come up with something different. And I think right in the beginning I said they're their own worst enemies. That's really what you're fighting against the whole time. You know, they're wonderful animals to work with. They really are unbelievable animals. But man, they can be challenging at times, and you have to be very much alert and aware of what can go wrong.
Thank you so much. Hi, welcome back, Sela. I'm going to hand back to you now. I just want to read this question from, just do that, from Uchishimba. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. The question is, what treatment do you often give for Nagana before translocation? Any effects on the rhinos?
It's a very good question. And to answer it simply, we use a drug here in South Africa called Samarin, which I think is fairly broadly available in the rest of Africa. Isometamidum, I think the name for it is. The only problem that we've had with it is it's very, very irritating to the rhino. It's just unbelievable, because it's commonly used in cattle, for instance, and cattle show very few side effects except for a little bit of a swelling. But when you use it on rhino, I vowed I'd never use it again after taking rhino to not Chad, to Rwanda. We injected those rhino. They were so uncomfortable for the first 6 or 7 hours that I said I would never use it again. And they all came up with swellings and abscesses, etc., etc. But subsequently, I have used it, and just recently moved some rhino in Zambia, and from Livingston to Kafui. So from a non-Tsetse area to Kafui is full of Tsetse flies. We used Samarin again, but this time we injected them with an anti-inflammatory, and it seemed to make all the difference. The rhino were fine, and they didn't have any side effects. So perhaps we're still learning. We're still learning.
As we do in life. Sela, welcome back.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Cooper, for the presentation. I see you've already jumped into the question Q&A session. So there is a question from Victor. Victor, do you mind unmuting and asking the question?
Sela, there are quite a few different Victors in the in the room. So maybe just read out the question, please.
I can see it on the chat. You know, okay, once again, I mentioned from the beginning, there's a big difference between white and black rhino. So the black rhino we tend to get away with by using single turbine helicopters, which obviously are a lot cheaper to run than to use a twin turbine. And they also weigh literally half that of a white rhino. However, we've still moved a lot of white rhino as well. And as I said, we haven't had any issues to this date. My friend, colleague of ours, transported that one rhino for over 200 kilometers. The furthest I've done it has been about 50 kilometers. So, and we haven't had any issues. So it's a very safe way of getting rhino out of difficult areas. Certainly recommended.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Dev. There is a hand from Dr. Koriwe. Dr. Koriwe is a lecturer at the Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Dr. Koriwe, can you please unmute and ask your question?
Oh, yeah, thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you for the presentation. It's a lovely presentation. I love the questions as well from the students. And let me also just quickly ask a question about to you about the baby rhinos. Could you say something about the baby rhinos? How would you transport them? Or have you not come across such, or they just done the other way, not on the helicopters? What do you do with baby rhinos? And if there is something like to transport mother and baby, how would you do that? Thank you very much.
Koliwe, unfortunately, with the poaching onslaught that we've experienced in South Africa over the last couple of years, we've found a lot of orphan rhino, and we've had to obviously translocate them to various orphanages wherever we can get the right care and attention. Sometimes these orphans are found in inaccessible areas, and we've put them into the back of helicopters when they are light enough to be able to do that. Or alternatively, exactly as I demonstrated earlier, just by slinging them out on their feet. In terms of mother and calf, we don't transport them together. We transport them in separate crates. I think, and what we have found, as soon as we get to the other side, to the destination, when you release them, mother and calf get back together without any problems at all. So different ways of doing it, of course, and managing it in a boma or managing it in a camp or whatever. You just have to make sure that the rhino do manage to find each other again. But we don't have any problems with the orphans. The problem is more getting them to drink and getting them accustomed to the, different scenarios and different environments.
Okay, just further to that, do you think they do foster mothering? You can do that? Is it effective if they're orphans? If in case they find another mother there, do they cope?
It has happened in the past with black rhino. I can't say the same with white rhino. These are animals that have lost their mother. The recent one was a mother that was struck by lightning, and so the calf was found shortly there afterwards, and then shortly after that, it was found together with another female that was also lactating, and it was drinking. So it can happen. I think it's difficult sometimes to observe all these things, interactions in a extensive type of environment. But it's not something that we try when we find an orphan. These animals are put straight onto either a bottle or onto sort of bucket substitutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Koriwe, for the questions. And in the chat, I can see we have 2 questions from our students. Mense Bisara is asking, what do you do in case of external parasites infestations?
It's always something that people insist on if we're going to be translocating animals. It's it's just a normal veterinary precaution. People don't like the parasites on these animals being relocated. So we use an acaricide, appropriate acaricide. We normally it would be a spray on kind of acaricide. But as I said, often we're a little bit. I am anyway. Perhaps being more of a purist and a conservation-minded person, is that some of these ticks belong to the rhino, and they're not responsible for transmitting any diseases. So why can't they just go with the rhino? But we normally always, especially if they're moving from one country to another, they would be treated with the appropriate acaricide.
Thank you so much. And there is also another question from Chikondi Kapangazwiri. Chikondi is asking, you said that black rhinos are very highly aggressive. Are there any safety measures that we can consider to lessen the effect of the attack?
I think that all just comes down to experience. Black rhino tend to be like that if you are used to seeing them in the bush. They're very inquisitive. But all you need to have is to have a tree between you and the rhino. If you don't have a tree, you can be in trouble. But one thing that's certainly worked for me is whatever I've got on me, whether it's a hat, sometimes in one case it was a rucksack. If you throw the rucksack down, you throw the hat down in front of the rhino, they take their anger out on the hat, and it gives you enough time to get behind a tree. But you have to have your wits about you when working with black rhino. Unfortunately, a lot of colleagues have been injured, badly injured, by a rhino in the past. But yeah, you just have to have your wits about you all the time.
There is another question in the chat, and I think it will be a nice way of ending this presentation. There is a question from Joshua. Joshua is saying, what has been your worst experience?
I've never had a worst experience. My experiences have just been memorable. I think, yeah, even I have to go back and think. My worst experiences, unfortunately, when having to deal with these animals, is when I've come across a poaching incident, because some of these animals are still alive. But that's my worst experience. For the rest of it, I've found it an absolute pleasure to work with them. They're challenging. They keep you on your toes, and you never stop learning. And it keeps you young.
Thank you so much. So with that being said, I think we should move on to the giraffe.